And again, we're going to stay on this. Again, this is a track now for this hour, is to really focus on DEI, inclusion, and certainly social determinants of health. And one of the leaders here in New York City around this area is our own Ann Koehler from one of our favorite digital health companies. Again, Medidata owns about 70% of the clinical trials that are going on right now in the world. Their software, I should say, really runs 70% of the clinical trials going on right now in the world, and is an enormous reason. And again, we talk about the impact of digital health, and a lot of time we don't give it enough credit. But if we hadn't had metadata software, we wouldn't have had 3 major vaccines with the degrees of efficacy that we found come out in less than a year. And again, I know that folks at Medidata don't like to toot their own horn necessarily, but that is just a stunning component of the digital health ecosystem, really helping humanity. I mean, we think about the vaccines that now have touched over 3 billion people globally. That's an impressive impact statement. So if you're in healthcare to do good stuff and help people, then you really want to understand what metadata does and how they do it. And getting really deep into that now, we're going to talk to Ann Koehler from Medidata and really understand what's happening within the DEI space, either from her perspective at Medidata or her perspective in the New York City ecosystem or the global ecosystem. But first, Ann, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Hi, Stan. Thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to be here. I am the product strategy lead for intelligent trials within Medidata AI's division. And I've actually spent the majority of my career within the healthcare space, supporting both emerging and more established biopharma companies as a consultant. I joined Medidata for all the reasons you just mentioned, Stan, and also because I just think there's a huge potential for innovation surrounding clinical trials. And I really think that data is the key to unlocking that potential. And so we're doing a lot of that at Medidata. And Medidata AI specifically leverages this industry-leading scientific and operational data set that we have that's actually derived from the data that's been captured using Medidata's Rave EDC platform that Stan, you alluded to, is kind of central to running a lot of the world's trials. And within that, in Medidata AI, we're working to build solutions that really help biopharma companies make better decisions, data-driven decisions, and accelerate timelines from study design all the way through to launch of treatments to get treatments to patients faster. Intelligent trials specifically actually is focused on supporting trial design through planning into operationalizing trials and actual execution. And what I'm excited to share more about today is actually, we most recently launched a new module related to diversity, where we're helping organizations to increase diversity within their clinical trials.
Yeah, and that I think is a stunningly important and much needed gap. We talk about the digital divide in healthcare all the time, and Medidata is one of the leaders in carrying this conversation forward, and has a lot of the institutional support that we just heard from Shante from the Ohio State University, and talking about the institutional needs, either the C-suite officer or the team that supports really helping to engender this. Tell us a little bit about what Medidata doing, what you're doing to really help increase diversity in clinical trials, or what you're seeing the ecosystem do, because this is something from the FDA down across all the manufacturers, academic medical centers. We're seeing an ecosystem-wide effort being put on this. And if anyone follows HITLAB, you'll see that whether it's electronic health records, telemedicine, remote patient monitoring, clinical trials, especially decentralized trials, which we know again is building. It's a big buzzword. Everyone's talking about it as a percent, and actual adoption rate of decentralized trials, it's single digits. But let's just keep an eye on that. It's growing. But talk about what makes it difficult to increase diversity in clinical trials to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we're in a really unique position at Medidata because we have kind of this breadth of data that we're able to leverage. And we know that diversity within clinical trials is really still a problem. We know that race and ethnicity really influence how patients respond to drugs. But historically, clinical trials are recruiting disproportionately white patients. And when those demographics of the patients that are recruited for trials and are participating in trials don't match the population that's actually affected by the disease, we can't really be certain that those treatments are going to be safe and effective for those populations that need them, which is a huge issue. And this is actually, particularly true for diseases that disproportionately affect diverse populations, such as cardiovascular, autoimmune, cancer, and really, including diverse patients in clinical trials is critical for making sure that we have accurate scientific outcomes that are representative of what you would expect in the real world. And some of the work that we've done at Medidata AI, we've done some recent investigation, doing analysis on the data set that we have and actually analyzing over 4,000 trials that have run on RAVE EDC to better understand Black participation in clinical trials in the US specifically. And we found a couple things. So the first is that we found that Black representation in clinical trials varies significantly based on disease area. So in particular, for example, lung cancer and Alzheimer's disproportionately affect Black patients, and yet the majority of sites that are historically used for those disease areas did not recruit any Black patients. And so that's pretty significant. The other piece of that study that was significant was that we found that only a small number of study sites are representing the majority of Black participant enrollment in the US. So it's really a concentrated number that's contributing to most of that enrollment. So that was really interesting. Another aspect, I think, of diversity in clinical trials that's really important is that it's related to health equity, as you mentioned before, Stan. Clinical trials means provision of access to novel therapies, right? So including diverse populations in clinical trials is really an issue of health equity. And as you mentioned too, Stan, this is really timely because the FDA is taking notice and has actually taken action earlier this year in shifting the industry toward better representation in clinical trials by issuing strong guidance that recommends companies create a race and ethnicity diversity plan and include that as part of their submissions for any trials that are going to be run in the US. So a promising step in the right direction from the FDA, and now that really means that companies are considering trial planning and diversity as part of that planning for trials.
That's really a great background, not only in some of the statistics that we're really battling with and kind of showing us and illustrating where the gap is as we're starting in this and really the last 5 years, but really what we need to close. And, closing that gap and closing it quickly, not just sitting on, sound bites and people talking about it, but actually tracking the data and seeing, okay, are we walking the walk, not just talking the talk? So what, in 2023, November 30th, at next year's HITLAB Summit, we'd love to have you back on and give us an update on the statistics and say, okay, here's where we are today. Here's where we were in 2022. Here's where we were in 2018 or whatever it might be, and give us that background. That would be really wonderful. But, when you're looking at all of this and you're seeing what not just Medidata is doing, but what the entire ecosystem is doing, how are we able to leverage data? We heard about this from Bill Toronto yesterday. Data is the new currency in healthcare to support enrollment of diverse patient populations in clinical trials. What can we do to help improve that with data?
Yeah, so I think just to start there, Stan, I think just mentioning, some of the challenges first, and then how we can help solve for those. So there's really barriers kind of on both sides. And when I say both sides, that means like the patient perspective and more the biopharma kind of in those companies that are running clinical trials as well. I mean, on the patient perspective, we heard that this earlier today too, there's often mistrust in clinical research. So trust is a big issue. There can be geographic and economic factors that really discourage participants from diverse communities from actually participating. And even like a lack of investigators, as we mentioned earlier too, is also a disincentive for diverse patients to actually enroll in trials. And then more from the industry side, which is really the side that we're focused on at Medidata AI, and especially within intelligent trials, is working with biopharma companies that are running these trials. We've seen an interest, but many companies don't even have a good understanding of their baseline of how they're doing in terms of diversity within the trials that they're running today. So kind of starting from the earliest stages of protocol design, and even before the study is starting, even those exclusion and inclusion criteria can be inadvertently creating diversity bias. So from the very earliest step, for example, like including exclusion criteria that are related to cholesterol levels, can impact ethnicity enrollment, since certain ethnicities tend to be more prone to high cholesterol levels. That's just one example there. Other reasons why it's a challenge for these companies is, the guidance was published, but it was also quite broad. So there weren't really guideposts or goals set in place by the FDA in terms of what diverse trials looks like. And then thirdly, I think it's around, limited data, which is another piece that we can help with. But most organizations are using kind of real world data as one set. Real world data is very important to this equation. It just serves a little bit of a different purpose in helping to identify where patients are versus which sites have been successful in enrolling diverse patients, which is really what we're helping to solve for here.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of the pieces that we're hoping to do is helping companies to, baseline and understand kind of where they are today. We have, this really large data set that spans over 27,000 clinical trials. That's across 33,000 different facilities across the world. The other significant part of this is that, we've done the work to standardize this data using CDISC standards for the demographics, and looking at this, in different ways to help baseline understand of how companies are doing in terms of diversity in their trials today, and also how they're doing versus the industry. So how specific trials are doing versus other similar trials in the industry. So within the same indication, understanding what trials are also enrolling diverse populations, and getting down to even the site level is really important too. And so we're able to help there and just identifying those sites that are going to be successful and have been successful in enrolling diverse patients.
It's fantastic. And you are truly a guru of diversity in clinical trials. And I hope you'll join us again next year at the 10th annual HITLAB Summit in HITLAB's 25th anniversary year. Is that a deal? You're able to come back?
Absolutely. I mean, we're so excited about this topic, and we're continuing to focus on this topic, looking at different aspects of diversity in clinical trials, like trends across regions, and criteria that actually differentiate those sites that have been successful in enrolling diverse participants. So we're really focused on this goal of improving health outcomes for all, and we will stay focused on it.
Congratulations on a great career, a great talk. Thank you very much. And again, appreciate the detailed data in there. And a loud round of applause from our virtual audience, cartoon hands, etc., for Ann Koehler from Medidata. Thank you, Ann. Outstanding. So, again, I think we've got to be careful as a digital health community that when we're talking about some of these really important areas, whether it's social determinants of health or whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion in digital health, that while we're having tremendous leadership from people at the very top of the healthcare system talking about improving these metrics, improving the actual numbers on this, we need to have metrics that are publicized on a yearly basis, on an annual basis, to ensure that there is accountability, that there is success, and that there is movement, progress being made. Because if we continue to move toward a digital healthcare system and we don't address these issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion, that digital health divide in healthcare is going to just continue to grow. As algorithms are being made and artificial intelligence is being used more widely, machine learning is being developed more thoroughly, it's going to spread, and it's going to be much more of a gap. And so we've got to start addressing these, and Ann's done a great job in doing that in the clinical trial sector.